The world is watching the fight to become the US president right now, but with elections being handled in completely different ways in Germany, Germans I think are watching saying, what the heck is going on over there? Which honestly is kind of what we were thinking as Americans living in Germany watching German elections happen for the first time. Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our baby, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. This year, we will have a US presidential election, and things are already heating up. Meanwhile, Germany will have their next Bundestag elections next year, and some chatter about who will form the next government has already started. In our lifetime, we have witnessed 7 presidential elections in the US, and 3 years ago, we witnessed our first German Bundestag election, and in turn, the first time we watched the selection of the next German chancellor. We've witnessed how campaigning is totally different, how voting is totally different, and how the overall feel in both countries during election periods is completely different than the other. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today in my video. An American's collection of differences in elections. So I'm gonna be honest. I think most of you would agree with me that the current political outlook in both countries can be quite exhausting and depressing. Therefore, I want to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Besides just the political nature of the world right now, it's also the start to a new year, which is a great time to work on yourself. Especially now that I have my own child, I have found that I can get caught up in the doom and gloom I see in the news and get bogged down mentally as I try and figure out how best to navigate life and raise my child. And I'll be honest with you guys and say that I have used a therapist in the past, and it was a tremendous help. I'll even further admit that before I tried therapy, I felt the stigma that I should pull myself up by the bootstraps rather than seek help, and it led me to worse places mentally and physically. So I really want to encourage you to have the courage to seek help to see how it can help you like it helped me. But I get that finding a therapist and talking to one can sometimes be a little overwhelming. Well, BetterHelp makes starting therapy easier and much less intimidating by easily connecting you with one of over 30,000 therapists in their network based on your personal needs, preferences, and location. Once you fill out their questionnaire, you'll be matched with the therapist, in most cases within just 48 hours, and then you can just schedule therapy at a time that's convenient for you. With BetterHelp, you can have therapy sessions as a phone call, video chat, or even messaging, whatever's the most comfortable form of therapy for you. But what's also amazing, if you don't feel like you click with that therapist, you can simply switch therapists with a click of a button in your settings at no additional cost, so you don't have to awkwardly break up with a therapist. Join over 4 million people who've used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life by clicking the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/passport2. Using this link helps support my channel, and it also gets you 10% off of your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. There are, of course, local elections, state elections, and national elections in both countries that can carry their own set of circumstances and differences. Today, I'm focusing primarily on the top leader in both countries and how they are elected. And right off the bat, one similarity between both countries is that the people, meaning ordinary Americans and Germans, aren't actually the ones that directly elect these leaders I am talking about. The US president is limited to just 2 possible terms and is elected every 4 years by a somewhat controversial body of 538 electors known as the Electoral College. To try and make a complicated system somewhat simple, each state is given a number of electors equal to the combined total of representatives and senators, which is based on the population of the state. Electors are chosen in each state by the political parties, and each state can do that however they want. In reality, nobody really knows who these people are, and all their job is to cast votes for the president based on what the popular vote is in each state. Most states have a winner-take-all system. So on election day, every voting American will choose who they want for president, and whoever wins the popular vote in the state would direct all the electors in that state's electoral college to vote for that person. However, some states don't require all electoral votes to vote for one candidate. So what makes them somewhat controversial? Well, there have been 5 times in which a presidential candidate actually received fewer actual American popular votes, but became president anyways because they won more electoral college votes, including in 2016 when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton to become the president. In Germany, you have a president and also a chancellor. However, even though the Bundespräsident is the head of state, most likely if you are not from Germany, you would have never heard of him because his job is mostly ceremonial, somewhat similar to the king in the UK. Because of this, you can more easily compare the political power of the US president with the German chancellor, who is the head of government. In any case, neither the chancellor nor the president are elected directly by the people. The president is limited to 2 terms like the American president, but terms are for 5 years rather than 4. They are elected by the Federal Convention, which is a special meeting of all members of the Bundestag or the parliament, and an equal number of members elected by the parliaments of the German states. The chancellor is selected in a different manner. Each political party chooses a candidate for chancellor before the parliamentary elections, and then once the Bundestag elections are done, members of the Bundestag have a secret vote to select a chancellor after coalition government has been formed. This individual is typically the candidate the party who won the most votes in the parliamentary elections chose prior, but not always. A German chancellor is also elected to terms of 4 years like the US president, but unlike an American president, has no limitations as to how many times they can serve. This was on full display when Angela Merkel served as chancellor for 16 years. When the heck is the US presidential election happening anyways? This is a question a lot of people ask themselves as candidates announce they will be running for president, start campaigning, take part in debates, and so on, but then it just keeps going on and on and on for years on end. In the US, there are no rules limiting campaign periods, and despite the next election taking place on November 5th, 2024, on November 11th, 2022, 725 days before the election, Corey Stapleton formally announced his candidacy for president, and this was one of the things that was a huge surprise and difference to us after moving to Germany and experiencing German elections. After being used to election marathons in the US, German elections seemed like a 100-meter dash where local and state laws allow parties to put up campaign billboards and posters starting only a few weeks before the election. They also limit the length and duration of radio and TV ads to 1 month before the election. Now, people of course start talking about elections earlier than that. Like, for example, people are already murmuring about what might happen next year in the next Bundestag election, but it's not official campaigning, and it's not in your face 24/7 for months or even years on end. In a sense, we felt like you just have to deal with the elections being in your face for about 6 weeks, which I found to be a bearable amount of time, and then it was essentially all over. You can try and look at the bright side and say that longer elections give voters a much greater opportunity to get to know the candidates before voting, but polls show that nearly 6 in 10 Americans are worn out by the amount of election coverage. Besides the duration of campaigning themselves being different in the US and Germany, how campaign advertisements look for politicians is also very different. For example, let's look at political posters because this was one of the first initial surprises that I noticed. When I first came to Germany in 2014 to study abroad and live with a German family, my host mother picked me up to take me to their house, and in that very first car ride, I noticed political posters hanging on the trees and lampposts. I remember asking what they were because they just looked so unique and different for me that I didn't even recognize them as political campaign posters. Now, one thing I will say is that there is one element of political posters and election cycles in Germany that can be a little more exhausting as an American living in Germany, and that is the number of political posters from the huge number of political parties that there are. Of course, in the US, we are used to seeing posters for mainly 2 political parties, but in Germany, you see posters for many different parties, meaning there are some polls with political signs climbing to the top, all from different parties. But there's other differences, like even the typical orientation of these posters, for example. In the US, it seems that most of our political signs and posters are landscape oriented, but German ones are more often in a portrait orientation. Or another difference is how, as I mentioned, in Germany, posters are only generally allowed out 6 weeks before the election, whereas in some parts of the US, political yard signs just become part of the permanent landscape of some homes and are out year-round. But the biggest difference to me, and what really made me not recognize them for what they are the first time I saw them, are the pictures on many of the posters. Some political parties just have slogans, catchphrases, or political promises on them, but the headshots on the posters are what is the most different for me. A vast majority of political signs in the US are just the names of the politicians without a photograph. For the most part, I think this is just because on the ballot, you will just see their name, so they are really drilling their name into your head rather than their face. But German political posters often look a lot like nice resume photos or an entertainer headshot of the politician. But outside of just posters, one of the biggest differences I have noticed is the overall atmosphere surrounding elections and campaigning. For one, in Germany, it is the party that matters rather than just the individual. Yes, you are aware of who the candidate is from each party that they will put up for chancellor, but at no point do you vote for the chancellor. Rather, on a German ballot, you give 2 votes, the first one for the Bundestag candidate from your district, and a second vote for a party so that the number of party seats can be assigned in the Bundestag. Even when I watch, for example, some SPD TV advertisements, you see Olaf Scholz, but at the end, he doesn't say vote for Olaf, he says vote for SPD. And 2, you don't see ferocious attack ads in Germany in general. While there has been some negative campaigning in the past, most campaigns always made sure to insert a certain sense of humor in their attack. In contrast to the German norms of almost gentle jabs in campaigns, there is one controversial and growing party, the AfD, which actually has been known for its more aggressive ads. But to illustrate how un-German this style of campaigning traditionally is, those have been described as US-style online attack campaigns. However, American politics, especially today, is totally opposite from Germany. Yes, the party matters, but it is all about the individual, and in order to win, it is all about attacking and tearing down the others. However, sometimes you do see a very brief glimpse of humanity.
I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
Even in debates, politicians are often posed questions, but the job of the politician is to see how, rather than answer the question, they can turn it into a slander of the others and get a soundbite to go viral.
I never attacked him on his look, and believe me, there's plenty of subject matter right there.
Is German campaign politics perfect? By no means. They have their issues as well and can get dramatic and petty as well, but taking the focus away from the individual and introducing more humanity into the politics that can still respect the other side seems to be a very interesting difference that was a welcome difference to me. Now, when it comes to who is allowed to vote in Germany and the US, at initial glance, you don't really see a difference. You must be a citizen of the respective country and you must be 18 years old. However, there is one interesting difference in who is allowed to vote and how they are allowed to vote. You see, when someone turns 18 in Germany and is a citizen, they are automatically registered to vote and that's it. They are in the system. In the US, that's not the case. In every state except North Dakota, you must physically register yourself to vote before you are actually allowed to vote. But in 2022, only 69.1% of the citizen voting age population was actually registered to vote. For many, there are negative feelings towards the electoral system, and for example, maybe don't believe their voice matters, so they just don't bother registering. However, 27% of those unregistered say that they want to, but just haven't gotten around to it. The most common way for Americans to register to vote is actually at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Whenever you do a transaction at the DMV, you have been required since 1993 to be asked if you want to register to vote. But what if you don't have a car or for whatever reason have never had to do any sort of business at the DMV? You can generally just go online and fill out a simple form and use one of your state IDs to register if you have internet access, or you can go to many different government agency offices and request to register and you can do it there. But why does this difference exist between Germany and the US? Well, at first glance, it seems like Germany, who is famous for making everything quite bureaucratic, actually figured out a way to make something easier than the US by just automatically making it so everybody on their 18th birthday can vote. However, it isn't simply that you don't have to register in Germany, it's that Germans have already registered themselves in a different way. In Germany, unlike in the US, you always have to register where you live with the local authorities every time you move into a new place. Therefore, there is already government documentation of who lives where and thus where they are allowed to vote. However, in the US, when you move to a new place, you don't have to register you and your address with any authority. Therefore, a state must find a way to ensure that those that vote in an election actually live within certain jurisdictions and aren't, for example, crossing state lines to tip votes one way over another, or vote for representatives that wouldn't actually represent where they live. So in both countries, you do have to register yourself in some manner in order to vote. It is just slightly different in that in the US, you are specifically registering to vote, but in Germany, you are registering your address, and that information can then be used for elections. So let's talk about election day itself. One interesting difference between Germans and American elections we've observed is the days in which they are held. According to paragraph 16 of the German election laws, election days must be on Sundays or official public holidays. In the US, voting is typically held on Tuesdays, and in the case of the US presidential elections, the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Seems kind of random, the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So why is that? Well, historically speaking, considering this rule was established in the US in 1845, Sundays were not considered because people had to go to church that day, and at the time, it wasn't so easy to go to polling locations back then, so it was too much to vote and go to church in one day. November was chosen because harvest season was over, but the weather in most of the country is still mild enough that it was relatively easy for people to travel to voting locations. There are other reasons, like they chose the Tuesday after the first Monday in November to ensure that election day never falls on All Saints' Day on November 1st, since that's an important holiday to various Christian groups. But even with voting being on a weekday, only 29 states currently require employers to give employees time off to vote in general elections, and only 23 of those states require paid time off. For example, in Oklahoma, where we come from, employers are required to give you 2 hours of paid time off, or more time for travel to your polling places if that's necessary. But in other states, that could mean that some people may feel like they can't afford to miss work in order to vote and therefore just don't. But there are groups that have pushed for election day to be moved to the weekends like it has been in Germany since 1919 to avoid this problem altogether. In Germany, as you can tell by most foreigners living in Germany influencers who complain regularly about nothing to do on Sundays because nearly everything is closed,
you can't play loud music, you can't mow your lawn, and everything is closed. Is Sunday not fun day in Germany?
this is a great day for elections because most people don't have work or appointments and therefore can easily get out to vote. In the US, things aren't as shut down on the weekends as in Germany, but still most people have off from work and therefore would be able to much more easily get to a polling location than on a weekday. But does the days the election is held on have an effect on voter turnout differences between Germany and the US? Well, you can't pin voter turnout differences on this one factor alone, of course, but in the previous Bundestag elections, Germany saw a voter turnout of 76.6%, and in the previous US presidential election, 66.8% of eligible voters turned up to vote, which was actually considered a huge number by US turnout norms. Election night in Germany and the US is also very different for lack of a better way of saying it. In Germany, it is much less exciting than in the US, which makes it sound a bit like a reality TV show. Not that in some ways it doesn't actually feel more that way at times. But what I mean is on the election night in the US, although the Electoral College doesn't actually cast their votes to actually determine who the next president is until much later, news stations report all day and night like it is the Super Bowl, giving results as they happen, and typically that night, you will know who is the next US president. In Germany, on Bundestag election day, you will get an idea of the makeup of parliament, but you won't know who the chancellor is or who will even be running the government. That's because you must wait to see which political parties end up forming a coalition in order to get a majority of the parliament, and then you can choose the chancellor. For example, German voters voted in September 2017 for the Bundestag, but it wasn't until March of 2018 that the Bundestag Bundestag voted for Angela Merkel to take up her 4th term. Of course, there are so many other differences between election in the US and in Germany, and these are just a few that I have observed. So if you would like to hear more, let me know in the comments and I can make a part 2 perhaps. To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is: hanging your clothes on a clothesline or using a drying machine? Which do you prefer? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video. And on for years on end. Yeah.
Hey, so, are you okay?
I'm in the middle of filming a video. State laws vary state to state on mail. In the US, state laws vary state to state on mail and voting.